Let's take the map of the region with the bases. You say, it strikes me. They think a lot about the risks. They think a lot about the backlash they're going to get from Iran, and we'll see that later in the show. Iran claims to have hypersonic missiles. What are the risks of blowback that exist that weigh on the Americans?
The Americans in the area? Logically, they don't have the capacity to protect all their bases at the same time. They have a lot of them, so logically, that's why we see some bases in Qatar that have been completely empty tonight. There are satellite images that showed it. So they have relocated some of their air assets to bases where they can ensure protection against these ballistic missiles. They emptied entire bases tonight. Yes, there are some bases in Qatar where there were dozens of fighter jets. There are satellite photos that came out half an hour ago, which are now empty. So that now, we know that they are preparing to face attacks by relocating their assets. Not near the jihadists they're trying to hit in Iraq, but where they can actually protect them.
Look at that plane. If in the next few hours or minutes Trump says, go ahead, it's probably that plane that will be the centerpiece, not you. Explain to us clearly why. First, it's not worth it. Xavier Tatelman. Look, Xavier Tatelman. He is seriously affected by aviation pathologies because his face lit up when we talked about warplanes. It's a nice B.
Two, it's a nice B too. So actually, you have to understand this. That's the reason why Americans don't have a social system. That's $2 billion flying in front of us. They have about a dozen of them. It's a stealth aircraft, a strategic stealth bomber with a very long range that has the capacity to carry and drop bombs weighing up to 12.5 tons. That means it can fly over an area without being detected, without even needing to ask for overflight authorization, and violate airspaces without those being violated even knowing it. So it can fly over Oman without asking, cross Saudi Arabia. It will go directly over the targets. Instead of having to launch missiles from 300 kilometers away, it can fly directly overhead, drop a 12-ton bomb that will penetrate and detonate at 60 meters deep. And given Iran's deeply buried infrastructure, that's what's useful.
No, a general once said in Bosnia, we Americans don't solve problems, we crush them. And actually, that's it. Give me targets and then we'll crush them. Not just the
Americans, but that's it, the strength. I'm fascinated by that. You can see how much it's not a calibrated logic. They are very methodical. They don't want to be just once, twice as strong. They want to be 100 times stronger, 100 times. Yes, you have to
crush. The balance of power has to be overwhelming. And the Americans, in this case, are very methodical. So before starting an operation, they gather the resources that actually allow them to crush the enemy. They don't conduct operations like we do. For example, Operation Serval in Mali, which was launched in just a few hours. They are not able to do that. They gathered a whole range of resources before getting involved. That's what they're doing right now. But generally, it's still a bit of a clue that they intend to use it.
That's right. And tonight, Trump explicitly states what he calls an ultimatum, meaning either Iran accepts a surrender, a complete surrender, or there will be bombings.
Two very simple words, an unconditional surrender. Let's be clear, I've had enough, I give up, that's enough. Or else, we're going to blow up all the nuclear material over there. They've always had bad intentions. They've been saying death to the United States, death to Israel, and death to everyone they don't like for 40 years. They're like bullies, like schoolyard bullies. We'll see what happens. A lot of things can happen. A war is complex. Nothing is ever completely over.
There you go.
Complete capitulation, unconditional surrender. And there are, so to speak, preparatory actions. The Israeli army bombed centrifuges, the centrifuge production site of several weapons manufacturing facilities, including in the Tehran region. Look at this modeling done by the Israeli army published today. Xavier Titelman, what exactly are we seeing here?
So right now, these are just buildings seen from above, but according to the Israeli army, this is where some of the centrifuges are produced, which are then used to concentrate uranium to reach enrichment levels that allow for the production of atomic bombs. Behind that, we are more than 2,200 kilometers away, if I'm not mistaken, from the Israeli border. That necessarily means that either you have planes like the F-15 that will drop some of their drop tanks. And we've seen in Syria these drop tanks being recovered on the ground by people who try to siphon out whatever fuel is left inside. That means that even today, they have the ability to make round trips without needing their own refueling aircraft. They go very far, they launch missiles with a range of 300 kilometers, and then they make the return trip back. They don't need a refueling aircraft to make this round trip, 2,200 kilometers plus 300 kilometers of range for the cruise missiles then, 2,500 kilometers for the F-15I. No, for the F-15, even the F-16.
Besides, they can do without it, but the F-35 definitely needs tankers.
The F-35, yes, but that's why I say the F-15s are the ones with the longest operational range.
And the F-15s carry much more. They're really the heart of the system. They're the ones that carry the most munitions. They're the big hitters.
The bomb truck. But what is the Iranians' counter-strike capability with this threat that, according to Iran, has been carried out? Iran is said to have fired hypersonic missiles at Israel, according to state television. The Revolutionary Guards claim that Iran has fired a hypersonic missile toward Israel. This projectile, called FATA, was already used during Iran's attack on Israel in 2024. At the heart of a salvo of 180 missiles, it follows an arc-shaped trajectory, and its name means victorious. Let's get into the technical details. David Tittleman.
In fact, there are several advantages compared to other traditional missiles, such as the Shahab-3, which has been widely discussed. The Shahab-3, for example, uses liquid propellant. That means, basically, you have to spend hours loading hydrogen and some very cold stuff, which also makes it possible to detect that a launch is being prepared. And so, sometimes that gives enough time for missiles to destroy the launch site. But here, on the other hand, it's like snapping your fingers. 2 minutes after the missile is gone. And so, it allows launchers to hide, come out, fire, and hide again.
Iran has...
How many? Very, very few, because it just became operational. They say in 2022 they would produce only 1 or 2 per month. So obviously after 2 or 3 years they would have about 50 of them maybe, but that's already a significant number. But out of the 3,000 ballistic missiles they have, is this one the hardest to intercept? Indeed, they have a very small quantity, and as far as we know, they hadn't used it until now. But we see reported salvos that are much larger than the salvos actually observed on the ground. That means what is reaching Israel today is less and less numerous. Indeed, if they had fired those missiles at the same time as the Shahed 136S at the beginning, it probably would have contributed in that saturation to having more missiles get through. However, on the first day, only 7 missiles got through. But on the following days, it was 0, meaning
that there are
interceptable on
the disruptive capability that Iran still has. It's very impressive to hear you. It's you, Michel Goya, who said France could not protect itself if it was subjected to the same attack. France could not protect itself.
Yes, of course, we don't have the capacity to withstand, in the end, to defend against salvos, hundreds of missiles coming every day. It gives, excuse me, an idea
of the power that Iran still has even now, because people say Iran is on its knees, maybe halfway on its knees, but it still has considerable firepower. Yes, but all the countries in the region...
From the moment they realized they could no longer compete with the Israeli army, especially in the air, or with the Americans, possibly, they all developed, Syria first, by the way, all developed a missile strike capability. By saying it will always work, that's our strength, that's our conventional deterrence, and it will always work. Well, the fact is that since then we've made progress, and I think, by the way, that if military action is needed, it will be primarily against ballistic missiles. The main immediate threat for them is that, so we'll start by crushing all the missile potential, and then meanwhile, yes, there might be B-2S that will hit nuclear sites.
We understand the scale of the operation here from what you just said. Me, naively, I'm really a layman in these kinds of matters. I understand now that is the scale of everything they're doing. It's because they want to protect themselves first. They know there will be some pushback, so it's important for them to have all the firebreak options.
Exactly. So they start by crushing all possible threats against them. And then once we've crushed everyone, once we have air supremacy, that's when we do
whatever we want and we go ahead. And those bombers taking off from Diego Garcia, say a word about that. We'll hear more about it later in the show, but that's probably the main issue.
So the Diego Garcia base is the one that can host those famous American strategic bombers. The B-2S, which are stealth, they can't move them just anywhere because they're stealth, so they need to be protected in a very specific atmosphere, warehouses with very specific humidity. And so they leave from there 3,500 kilometers. That's a great range because from that base they can reach pretty much anything in the entire Indian Ocean. And from there they actually can, 4 or 5 hours later, they're able to deliver those famous bombs we talked about, the guided bomb unit 57S, which can destroy targets very deep underground.
We can bet without being wrong that if there's a map being shown tonight to the President of the United States, it's that one. That means the American generals are telling him, here, we have our bombers, and tomorrow, if you give the order, we'll send them to bomb.
The day the Americans decide to push the button, there will be cruise missiles launched by ships, submarines, fighter jets coming into play, and strategic bombers. It's going to be a deluge in every sense. We're talking about several hundred missiles that will arrive on the first night when the Americans decide. And yes, the B-52 would allow, for example, to prevent stockpiles of ballistic missiles from being used in the following days, in retaliation by Iran against American bases.
Let's take stock of the Armada, the United States ship Ford, the United States ship Nimitz, the aircraft carrier Nimitz encountered in the South China Sea. And you're right, there too, they're stripping, what's the saying? We strip Jean to dress Paul? 1,000 capes to the west in the direction of the Middle East against the backdrop of conflict. It's an aircraft carrier that can carry more than 60 planes and 5,000 men. General.
Yes, so all three of them, roughly, General Ford a bit more, but we must not forget the base, indeed, at Deutsch. So there is a sort of fourth aircraft carrier, at least as powerful in terms of capacity as the others. We must not forget that there is also the entire escort, all the destroyers that accompany them, some of which have strike capabilities. Also, we must not forget the Oyo-class submarine, which is somewhere in the region and which covers this area of 140 Tomahawk missiles. So in the end, that makes for a considerable strike force. Basically, in terms of aircraft, you simply have the equivalent of the Israeli Air Force there, with the particularity that it will be closer to Iran than the Israelis are. So it will be able to carry out even more sorties each day. Plus, it has a colossal missile strike capability, plus the famous B-2 squadron, which can do things that the Israelis can't do.
The aircraft carriers, the submarines, because they're surrounded by submarines, that needs to be explained too. That is, these groups, this carrier strike group, has submarines around it, somewhere under the water.
Yes, it's an attack submarine that's there mainly to ensure its protection. But as I was saying earlier, at the core, it's a nuclear submarine, a former nuclear submarine, a missile launcher, something that was supposed to launch Trident missiles and that has been decommissioned and converted into a conventional missile launcher. You have to imagine 140 cruise missiles inside this submarine.
In just one
submarine. In just one submarine. And so, yes, once again, you have a strike force that is absolutely colossal. I want to point out that there is also no ground force involved in all of this. There is absolutely no question, except maybe for raids by special forces operations, of setting foot on Iranian soil. The system...
Naval Air Force and the Air Force system. Look at these images, which are extremely impressive because you can see the sheer quantity. These are the refueling planes leaving from the United States and those arriving toward the Middle East. Explain this map to us clearly. David Hittenman, because it's been going on for 2 days now and the flow...
So these are the tracked aircraft, since these are commercial planes that have been converted into tankers. That means some of them will have hundreds of tons of fuel on board. Two models, KC-46 being the most modern, they're basically Boeing planes, roughly speaking. Why go all the way to the United States to get them?
They don't
have enough in Europe and the Middle East? No, actually, they have a deployed force that matches the local temporary needs of the United States Air Force in the theater, and possibly to support their allies. But if they have to conduct large-scale operations with their entire air fleet from the whole area, plus their aircraft carriers, plus everything they're bringing in, because there are also fighter jets, there are F-22 Raptors crossing the Atlantic. There are a lot of fighter jets that also crossed the Atlantic last week, because there were
an exercise
in Europe called Atlantic Trident. So with all the fighter jets gathered, they actually need tankers if they have to carry out long-distance missions.
We're going straight to Washington now. Helene Bonnet, this is a very important moment in this escalation toward war. I'm giving them the news that the Wall Street Journal is reporting. The President of the United States is said to have told his advisors that he approves the plans to attack Iran. Helene Bonnet.
Yes, this information was provided by the Wall Street Journal, which cites sources close to the deliberations. This private conversation is said to have taken place last night, but while approving his plans for now, Donald Trump is said to have put the final order on hold. And that's what he ended up explaining several times today. It's that Donald Trump said he was once again issuing this ultimatum to the Iranians. He told the Iranians that it was a little too late to negotiate. And then, while saying that, he seemed to be putting pressure on them and still leaving the door just a little bit open. He said he still hadn't made his decision and that he would probably make it at the last moment. We do know that he has been briefed on possible plans, the military options available to him. And according to National Broadcasting Company, he is currently discussing them with his advisors in the Situation Room. It's another security meeting that's taking place at the White House right now.
It feels like when we remember previous crises against Milosevic, against Saddam Hussein, that this scenario has often repeated itself, where it's almost as if we're pretending to try to make a side give in when it won't. It's hard to imagine the Iranian authorities, the Islamic Republic, giving in completely. What does total surrender mean? To give up?
Giving up 15 years of effort in nuclear development, which seems to be their only political goal, seems complicated, but now if they want to survive, maybe it's their only solution. Now, what you have to understand is that Trump approved the attack plans on Iran, and that's no small thing. So that means, at first, everything we've seen, everything...
This whole ecosystem...
This whole armada that has been deployed. That means, one, we really destroy for good all of Iran's air defenses. Then we destroy all their ballistic capabilities to prevent their interests. We talk a lot about the Americans, but the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, everyone is targeted. Everyone has suffered from Iranian terrorism for years and years. And then, in a second phase, prevent any resurgence of a nuclear program. But that's not really the immediate operational urgency. First, we want to be able to operate freely and then avoid the risks. And secondly, indeed, the objective of the war is definitely nuclear and maybe to bring down this regime. But again, that's like stepping into the unknown.
It's the death sentence for the Iranian nuclear program in any case. That is, even if by some extraordinary chance they suddenly kept a low profile. A line has been crossed, a threshold has been crossed. It's the threshold of war for the first time. And so now Iran will be under constant surveillance, and there will be no more hesitation. Now that this threshold has been crossed, there will be no more hesitation to launch a military attack, whether it's the Israelis, the Americans, or the Iranians. If, by some extraordinary chance, after getting themselves out of this predicament, they tried to renew or restart a nuclear program. So I think that now it's become something that's impossible for them. So they might as well try to negotiate something, the survival of the regime or simply stopping
the strikes. There's Trump's ear. He's playing with this sword of Damocles over the heads of the mullahs, and he even does it in a falsely casual and nonchalant tone. The sequence we're about to see is absolutely incredible. He says, you'll see, maybe it's next week, maybe a little earlier. And he talks about a show. You're going to see this show.
Are the United States getting closer to striking Iranian nuclear facilities? What do you think?
You don't seriously think I'm going to answer that question, do you? Are you going to strike Iran's nuclear facilities? And at exactly what time? Sir, are you going to strike them? And could you let us know so we can be there and watch? I'll tell you, you don't know if I'm going to do it. I might do it. I might not do it. Nobody knows what I'm going to do. I can tell you that Iran has a lot of worries.
They want
to negotiate, but why didn't they negotiate with me before all these deaths and this
destruction.
Why not negotiate before? I told them, why didn't you negotiate 2 weeks ago? You could have gotten out of it.
The main plan, no doubt, is to strike Fordo Mountain, where the most deeply buried nuclear sites are located. That's what Columbia Broadcasting System reports, citing a number of sources close to the matter. About 40 kilometers from the city of Qom, south of Tehran, it's the country's second uranium enrichment site, a strategic target. Please explain to us, Xavier Titelman, what this site represents. This huge building of 5,500 square kilometers, the tunnel entrance, and somewhere under the mountain, the centrifuges.
It's an underground complex that, according to Israeli intelligence, is relatively deep, with bends, with tunnels that are several dozen meters wide. This helps to lessen the effect of a blast, meaning that if you have an explosion in one part of this underground complex, it won't necessarily spread and hit the next door. So you would still need a buildup of strong explosions to be able to reach deeper inside. Nevertheless, you can also simply block access, electricity, the ability to get in and keep working there. So even if we can't destroy deep inside, there are some people who tell us it could be 800 meters below the top of the mountain. So obviously we can block access to this site, but if we can't destroy it, we can at least make it unusable.
Let's do it. Let's bring General Norlin into the discussion. You're with us, General Norlin, and you're one of the top experts on these subjects. We can see you on the screen. Good evening, General. Thank you very much for being here. On the screen, we can see what we thought was the main centrifuge hall, the tunnel entrances, and the auxiliary service buildings. How many bombs would it take, or will it take, to destroy that?
It would take a lot. That's why all of this is very unpredictable. But as Titelman just said, it's not necessary, especially if it's deeply buried, to reach the very core of the furnace's center. But simply to cut off the electricity supply, to prevent vehicles from entering, to block all entrances. So there you go. There are other ways than just deep penetration, because after all, even if the bomb has a very significant penetration capability, it goes beyond 100 meters. And even before that, it will be very difficult. So it will take a lot of bombs. It's still a very delicate operation. Let me remind you that attacking nuclear sites is not only discouraged, but also prohibited by the International Atomic Energy Agency. And there is a very significant risk of contamination. Even if it remains confined deep underground, there will inevitably be radiological contamination, a general contamination.
The radiological issue is always present. Whether we conduct a nuclear test in the Sahara or blow up a depot containing uranium, there will inevitably be consequences. You shouldn't go sniffing the dust afterward. But still, we're not at the level of pollution that we would have, for example, around the Zaporizhia plant, which could be a potential Chernobyl. Today, Chernobyl is destroyed for centuries and centuries. You go to Hiroshima, we don't have a level of radiation that prevents people from living in the area. So yes, every time we hit a site that is potentially radioactive, you will have leaks. But it's not as serious as what we had in Ukraine.
The risk is from the dust.
Yes, it's the dust.
In principle, there should be relatively little dust. Now, this kind of site, as we've already mentioned several times, it can also affect the ground. You arrive, maybe that's the surprise Gerard Ouzani was talking about.
It's far though, right? It's far, yes, so you need helicopters.
It's still possible. The Israelis have carried out very daring operations like this. So maybe an airborne raid, possibly a way to land C-130S in the area. It's an assault. It's very mountainous there. It's very mountainous there. No, but there are highways. Yes, there are highways, and on the other side of the mountains, it's possible. Well, there you go. But we have to remember that Natanz was also hit, so the sites have already been struck.
Others will say Emmanuel Macron is in the tradition of Villepin, in the tradition of those who already in 2003 refused American action. What is your opinion on that?
If our position is stable for once, we can't complain about it. Our goal is to avoid an escalation in the region. We were talking earlier about whether this will lead to chaos if we end up with what we've tried in Afghanistan. Thousands of deaths, trillions of dollars invested, only to have the Taliban return. 20 years later, it's a failure. If we're talking about the Arab Spring, like in Tunisia, where the people took the opportunity to put someone more democratic in charge, or at least managing to get rid of the mullah's regime, which in the end everyone would like to see disappear, that's a good thing. But if we're trying to impose a leadership that was decided by Jerusalem or Washington, it will be a failure. We have to say right now, let's not try to impose anyone. Good luck trying to do regime change with a purely air operation. But of course, if you don't have a ground component, it's impossible. You shouldn't go after that with an air operation. Exactly, that's not the objective.
It shouldn't be the United States or the West